So as I mentioned, we're talking about Parks Vision 2030, continuing the legacy. And I want to talk a little bit about that legacy. And Jack is really, and the Stapley family have been a big part of that. But before we get to that, let me just give you a quick background. I started with Maricopa County almost 15 years ago now, coming in as the deputy director for 1 year and then following up as the director for nearly the last 14 years. And when I first walked through the door, one of the things that I asked is, being the kind of traditional park professional that I am, I said, where's our park system master plan that kind of tells us where we're trying to go in the next 10 to 20 years and gives us our vision and our mission. And somebody kind of looked sheepishly and walked over to a shelf and pulled this book off the shelf. Actually, before they pulled it off, they had to dust it off a little bit because it was dated 1965. And that was the park system master plan that was guiding the department. So as I came in, I knew really one of my first priority missions as a new director was to develop a system master plan. So in 2007, we started working on that system master plan. And by 2009, the Board of Supervisors had adopted this Maricopa County Park and Recreation System Master Plan. Go ahead, Jenny, to the next slide. So that master plan in 2009, though, since we had not really done a system plan in almost 50 years, we really got down into operations and policies and procedures and updating mission and vision and things like that. So we were really heavily focused on the operation of the park system and in trying to make sure that the system of parks that we already had in place were truly functioning as a system. So that 2009 plan did that. It recommended, I think, 108 different strategic actions that we needed to put in place over the next 10 years. And I think we've done a fairly good job of putting most of those strategies in place, or at least starting working on a great number of them. So the other part of that was I kind of vowed that every 10 years or so, we were going to continue to do that strategic planning process, that visioning. And when I started and pulled in Jay with Dig Studios this year, we kind of went back and said, you know, what is the true legacy of this department? And interestingly enough, we pulled out this plan from 1965. And one of the things that I will tell you when I read that during my first week in office here, I realized that somebody had done a really, really good job of setting up a park system and then following that. So as you can see on the screen here, that legacy really goes back to 1957 when more than 500 volunteers, community groups, elected officials from around the valley got together and said, we need to have a county-wide park and recreation system and do a county park and recreation needs assessment. So that was the first step. And then in February of '63, the Board of Supervisors passed a resolution that established a park system through a number of deeds and federal land leases. And then by December 1 of '65, the board adopted the first regional county park system plan, and that was the document that I showed you. The very heartening, go back to that if you would, Jenny. The really interesting part of this to me is if you look at this slide, this is a group of folks that worked on the original plan. And it's not only Maricopa County folks. You'll see on the left-hand side of the picture, you have the Maricopa County Park Director, you have the City of Mesa Park and Recreation Director, you have the City of Phoenix Parks and Recreation Director. All of the major players at that time were a part of developing this system approach. If you look at the right-hand side of the picture, the gentleman that looks like he's speaking there, That's Stuart Udall. And Stuart was Secretary of Interior at the time that this park system was developed. And he really coined that the Maricopa County Park System was a model for the rest of the country to follow in partnership with the federal government in the future. And next to him is the Deputy Secretary of Interior and the Arizona State Bureau of Land Management Director. So a real, cross section of city, county, state, and federal folks that put this plan together. Okay, go ahead, Jenny. So that system plan provided a real clear and detailed scientific background for the planning of the future planning of the parks. It reflected the needs and desires of citizens. It established standards for the entire park system. It recommended that each park moving forward have its own master plan, and it also analyzed the long-range effects of the park, both from a sociological and economic point of view, as well as a biological point of view. Next slide. And it's interesting to me when you look back at this plan as well, because a big part of this plan was response to growth. The folks in the late 50s said, our valley is booming. We need to make sure that we're responding to growth. And we look at that today and say, okay, in 1960, they had 664,000 people in the entire county. And we look at that today and we say, wow, that isn't many people, but they were looking at more than doubling in growth projections in a 20-year period. So they, again, going back to that idea of promoting the legacy, they were very cognizant of the growth that this valley was going to experience and setting up a system of regional parks that were at the periphery that the public could use. And it's interesting to me, one of the op-eds that I read in our archives from the 1960s was a gentleman that basically said, why the heck would anybody set aside land in the White Tank Mountains for a park? No one will ever live within 30 miles of that area. As you can tell now, White Tank is almost entirely surrounded by housing projects. So they were very foresightful. Go ahead, Jenny. So here you can see that they projected by 1980 we would have a population of 1.4 million. These are slides provided by the Maricopa Association of Government, and by 1975 we had truly 1.3 million people in the valley, and you can see that the population represented in red. So now move forward to 2010. And we have 4.193 million people in the valley. And you can see White Tank's off on the left. Population is coming around that park. McDowell up on the far right. Population is coming around that park. You can see at this point, South Mountain Regional Park, or South Mountain City of Phoenix Park, is entirely engulfed by population. So if we look forward to 2040, this is what the population looks like with 7.1 million people. White Tank is almost entirely surrounded. McDowell, other than being buffered by the forest and some of the tribal lands, that's pretty well surrounded. Even down to the southeast Santan Mountain Regional Park, which is in Pinal County, is being inundated with population growth. So I think that's the imperative for this park system plan, is to look for to renew the legacy of protecting open space for future generations. Next slide. Just wanted to, and I've already talked a lot about this, so I won't expand too much on this, but we want to make sure that folks understand that when we are talking about a park system plan, we're talking a time horizon of 20 to 50 or 10 to 50 years. We want to address development pressures that may impact park sustainability, identify growth of the existing system and expanding the system through acquisition, identify opportunities for greater visitor access, identify plans for economic impact in what's called the new economy, and that's actually pointed out in our Maricopa County comprehensive plan. And then finally address regional scale conservation measures to sustain a system of connected landscapes. Next slide. And so just to contrast that, you see White Tank Mountain on the screen here. We just in 2017 finished the park master plan for that. And for a park master plan, we really look at a 10-year horizon. We look at really more management issues, sustaining the local environment of the park, local growth projections and encroachment, and then identifying financial resources to develop the park itself. Next slide. So as we move forward into this Parks Vision 2030 plan, one of the things that we've tried to do is ground the plan in solid data. And so what you see on here is really a compilation of a number of studies that we've already looked at. Number one up there, parks are an essential service. I think most of us in this room know that. But COVID really highlighted that, and there's actually a governor's executive order now that says parks are essential. And so I think COVID has, well, it's had very many bad ramifications. There have been some things that have come out of that are positive for the future of parks and open space in the future. 98% of Arizona residents say that parks, preserves, forests, and open space are important to them. This comes from a study that was done by the Morrison Institute at ASU and funded by the Pulliam Foundation. Further, they found that protecting air, water, and land and wildlife are among Arizona's top 3 priorities for future action. We found through the outdoor recreation industry reports that 59% of Arizona residents participate in outdoor recreation each year, and that's backed up through the Arizona statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan that State Parks puts out. And I would say that, dare say that number is significantly higher over this last year. We're seeing many more people actually visiting the parks. We know that Maricopa County Park visitors rank their satisfaction with county parks as extremely high, and this is a visitor survey that was done by Arizona State University for Maricopa County Parks. We know also, and I think this one's very interesting that we need to keep in mind when looking at our park system, is that Maricopa County Park visitors report observing the scenic beauty as the #1 reason for visiting our county parks. So while we know that health and wellness issues, activities like mountain biking and hiking are a big factor in why people go to our county parks, I think it's important to understand that the scenic beauty, the aesthetic quality of our parks is critical to having people visit those parks. If we switch over to the right side of that screen, Maricopa County is the fastest growing county in the US for the last 4 years and continues at that pace. We've already talked about 7 million people by 2040 being projected, but the other piece of this is those additional 3 or so million people have to go somewhere. They have to live somewhere, they have to have housing, they have to have businesses to work in. And in order to accommodate that growth to 7 million people, over 2 million acres of property are going to need to be developed in Maricopa County to accommodate that growth of 7 million. So that's something to keep in mind. More than 75% of county park visitors agreed that more regional parks are needed. And then this next piece on economics comes from the outdoor recreation industry, that outdoor recreation is among the state's largest economic sectors at 21 billion annually. And then finally, again, another study that we had commissioned through Arizona State University said for every dollar invested in a county park, we now know that there is a $4.85 return on investment for that dollar spent operating a county park. Next slide, please. So based on all that research, based on the 2019 plan and some other factors, we've come to look at this planning effort based on 6 planning elements. And really, if you look at it from one side or the other, basically half of the planning elements are people focused, the other half are place or natural resource focused. And if you look at the elements on the people side, is we want to make sure this plan addresses community health and well-being, quality of life, and the new economy, and providing exceptional visitors experiences. On the place side of the house, we want to make sure that we're looking at preserving regional natural heritage, and that's that 20 to 50 year look out of continuing the legacy. We also want to make sure, though, that this plan has some focus on sustaining and maintaining existing park resources. And then something that's becoming even more critical over the last 10 years is making sure that our landscapes are connected and there are trail connections at a regional scale. Go ahead, Jenny. Yeah, and this just explains that. You can move to the next slide. So what we want to do today is enlist your expertise to look at opportunities for regional parks. How do they fit into both city plans, organizational plans, as well as federal plans? We want to look at identifying opportunities to expand the regional park system through partnerships, identify economic opportunities as well as funding sources to expand and sustain a regional park system, and then also identify infill and access opportunities for underserved communities within the Maricopa County region. And with that, I think I am ready to turn it over to Jay Hicks.
All right, thanks, RJ. I think RJ alluded to this earlier in his presentation, but we have had 4 different focus meetings so far, and we've divided them up into the regions, and we found that literally the list of participants for each one of the region was probably as large as this group is today. And so we really appreciate you being on. But this just gives you a little bit of a snapshot of sort of the scale of the open space and the park system we're looking at today. And so we just want to get this down just from the standpoint of just illustrating just the number of people. And obviously we have some cities that cross over and some agencies like City of Phoenix and Buckeye and BLM that cross over, and even the U.S. Forest Service cross over a lot of regions. But anyway, so just want to let you know we've had some pretty in-depth conversations over the last week or so. We actually had 2 last week and 2 the week before that, and really good participation, much like today. So we had some really good information. We call it almost like boots on the ground kind of information too. So this has been really, really helpful. Jenny, go to the next. And so we will be going through some questions today. If our previous groups probably or any evidence, we probably won't get through all of them. So we're not going to try to race through them, but we're trying to open up a conversation amongst around these topics. Go ahead and go to the next, please. So we do have some resource maps we'll be looking at. One that's very important is really the land ownership, and then even more importantly, those lands that have either development on them or even a plat that's basically, or a master plan that's actually been on the land too. Go ahead and go to the next. We also, again, at our fingertips, we actually have the Arizona Game and Fish. This is the habitat, or actually the wildlife corridor habitat study. It was done, I think, around 2008, I think published in 2012. This has become a really good resource, and we're finding more and more cities are starting to look at this along with the agencies. Go to the next, please. And then also we have agency master plans. If we need to kind of refer those, we probably won't get down in the weeds on that today. We're going to stay pretty much at the 30,000 foot level. Go ahead and go to the next, please. And then the possible outcomes. What we're really looking for today are your ideas, and this is a little bit of a primer for questions to comments so you can get a chance to maybe think about them. Like I said, we have a lot of good information on possible connections, but now it's more so, what we now need to know the how. So start thinking on partnerships that you may have had or actually in the process of having talks about, or you have in place. especially partnerships with other cities, with other agencies, because to create sort of this overall system. The one thing that RJ had mentioned too is as we look at sort of the next legacy piece for the Maricopa County Park System, and we call it more of the Valley or Maricopa County overall, we realize that that's not going to be probably an easy lift for one agency, meaning Maricopa County. So we're looking, at a possibility of this expansion of a kind of a larger regional system that has a number of partners that have land ownership, that have agencies, organizations that promote certain activities. So we'll be thinking about that today. Okay, go ahead, Jenny. And so we wanted to show just I always love this diagram because this shows the existing regional park system that was established in 1965 with the addition of Vulture Mountain, which is the newer, the newest regional park added to the list with BLM as a patent owner. But what we're looking at is just the scale of Maricopa County. And then also to let you know too, we've had Pinal County on the phone too, and they participated in the Southeast region because obviously the Valley, as we realize, doesn't stop at the borders, and neither does our trail and open space system. Go to the next. But really the opportunity that we start seeing are lands that are maybe have partnership opportunities. BLM is probably one of the largest, if not the largest landholder in the West Valley, and along with state land, but you can see the preserves, basically the wilderness areas along with just their land holdings. And so we've had basically BLM, I believe, was on 3 of the 4 focus sessions. So obviously they can encompass a very large part of the valley as far as their management plans and their ownership. And so once we start overlaying, and these circles represent a service area, this is a 10-mile service area. So not only looking for the coverage within Maricopa County, but also this is a bit more of the boots on the ground as development happens, and RJ alluded to, like White Banks, for example, it has really one gate in, and the possibility of possible other locations along the borders, meaning on the western borders of White Banks, may be a new trailhead similar to other aspects along the regional trail. And then also in the blue are the larger regional parks by the cities, obviously the Phoenix Preserve and all Scottsdale Preserves, very large land holdings. All right, go ahead and go to the next. We also have been looking at, rather than expansion, we've also been looking at the lands back within basically within the valley. And one of the areas we've really zeroed in on are the river corridors. The river corridors represent a connected landscape. And this is where, Flood Control District and the Corps of Engineers and many cities really participate. And this is where I know many people on the phone being involved in the West Valley Recreation Corridor or the Rio Reimagined or Trace Rios. There's a lot of different, focuses and master plans. But we also see this as that connected landscape in the future. Again, we're looking out not only 20 years, but we're looking out 50 years. So this is really sort of a really broad look. And this is why we have this group together, because we want to keep you really at the really large scale. But we also realize that this may be an opportunity to provide parklands or wildlands to kind of the either underserved areas within the valley, and then also just the renovation or basically rehabilitation of some of the river corridors themselves. So this is just a heat signature, and you can definitely tell, once you get into the city, you can always kind of point out Arcadia because it sticks out like a sore thumb just south of basically Kennebec Mountain. And you can really start seeing some of the disparities between the heat islands, and it has to do with a lot of times with the demographics, the income levels too. All right, go to the next, please. And so where we're at in the process is this lower right quadrant. We had a little bit of a pump the brakes around COVID time. And so obviously we're still in it, but we're also finding that we're getting much more participation on these type of calls, just from the standpoint, I can take up an hour and a half of your time rather than 2.5 hours. So thank you so much for attending today. And what we're doing right now is we're in the process of developing the concepts. And so part of the concepts have a lot to do on how we go about this. And that's what we want to talk about a little bit more today.